And the poem is called H2O GATE Blues. And if H2O is still water and GATE is still gate, what we're getting ready to deal on is the Watergate Blues.
Hello, this is John Armwood back with Armwood Opinion, and today is Tuesday, the 9th of October, and today's video is meant to talk about where do we go from here. The midterms are coming in just less than a month. We lost the battle on the Kavanaugh nomination, which we expected to lose. But part of what I want to talk about today is how do we react to losing battles? How do we handle the issue of optimism? I had a discussion on Facebook where I was talking about the reality of our situation, and the man made a comment saying, well, we have to have optimism. I categorically reject that notion. Optimism is not necessary to fight a battle. We have Claude McKay's famous 1919 poem, If We Must Die. Read that poem, and he talks about it. We give meaning to our life not through a false hope that conditions inevitably are going to be better. As people of African descent in America, as the victims of generational rape, generations of sexual abuse, generations of murder, generations of discrimination, generations of abuse, both physical and mental, we know that 400 years of history is probably not going to change dramatically in our lifetime. My son, John III, said something very profound a few weeks ago to me that really shook me to my core. He said, Dad, you were the first generation of African Americans who were born with an opportunity for equal rights under the law. And technically, I was a teenager before the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed. Well, I was actually 12, so I wasn't quite a teenager. And the Open Housing Act of '65. And they were not implemented during my lifetime. Brown versus Board of Education was never implemented. I mean, they tried. I was part of the school integration in New York City, and nobody talks about what happened in the North. But in 1961, I was part of an experiment of integration of the schools in Brooklyn, New York, where I was bused from my home on Jefferson Avenue in Bedford-Stuyvesant, where I had gone my kindergarten and first and second grade to a school in East Flatbush. I had gone to PS 70, some of you may know, on Patchen Avenue in Brooklyn, to PS 198 at East 42nd in Albany. That's where I first heard the word nigger, the first day of school. A boy asked me, am I a nigger? I told him I didn't know because I had never heard the word before. I was in the 3rd grade. I came home and asked my father, am I a nigger? That's continued as we that spring moved to Staten Island. And I went from the 3rd grade to the 12th grade being the only black child in my class. And my last 2 years of high school, there was no other black students in the high school. My first 2 years, there was one other, and he was 2 grades ahead of me. So my son was making a very important point, And we have to look at ourselves in terms of not just our generation, but the arc of history. And the arc of history does not always bend toward justice. It sure didn't bend toward justice after Boris Yeltsin left the Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed. It seemed like it might, but it reverted back to totalitarianism under Putin. A different form after the decline, after the fall of Mao. China developed a state totalitarian capitalism. The United States under Trump is moving in a totalitarian direction. His attacks on the media, on our First Amendment, are clearly signs of that. My point is, how do you deal with this trend without falling in despair? Because that's the real question. And as an African American, I think that we have a profound understanding that most white Americans don't have, because they've not had the experience that we have had in these shores. Their ancestors came here with hope. This was a land of opportunity. Ours came here with terror. We came here in bondage. We didn't know if we were going to be eaten or not. We didn't know what the story was. So we have learned to understand the reality that our lives gain meaning from our everyday actions. You always hear me say, resist, resist, resist. Resistance is not futile. What I mean by that is we may not win the battles. We may not win the wars. We'll ultimately be going to lose the ultimate war, which is life. We're going to die. But in the meantime, in the between time, we can have meaning and joy and happiness by struggling and making changes for the better in the lives of our loved ones, ourselves, and people around us. We give and receive joy from giving and helping others. We receive joy from achievements of our own. We can relish the victories that we do win. We can take heart in the victories that we do win. But to have this mythology that things are inevitably getting better is nothing but a secular religion, which I reject. I think it's a leftover anachronism from the European Enlightenment, and it has really nothing to do with the reality that I've experienced, that my family has experienced. My father knew 2 generations of slaves. I'm the first generation in my family that did not know a slave. Let that sink in for a minute. I'm the first generation in my family that did not know a slave. I'm 65 years old. Think about that. What the implications of that are. It wasn't that long ago. Segregation I experienced as a child. I experienced it in New York City. A Mrs. Cooper, 3rd grade school teacher at PS 198, would not let me participate in a class election when I tried to nominate somebody. I was the only black child in the class, and she told me to put my hand down, that I wasn't ready to participate in the class election, even though my academic scores were at least on par with the top students in the class, if not higher. So my point is that optimism and hope are luxuries that the privileged enjoy. Those of us who are living in struggle, we face the Kavanaugh loss as inevitable. I look at it as being cyclical. We make progress in America. We made progress during the late 1850s and 1860s after the Dred Scott decision And we had the Civil War. We had Reconstruction, which was a great period of progress in America. Then after the Tilden Hayes election in 1876, the troops were moved from the South. They were moved out west to exterminate and remove the indigenous Americans. Yesterday was Indigenous Americans Day, from the land. And later on they went to march into the halls of Montezuma in Mexico City to steal half of Mexico in a war that was started by President Polk under false pretense and lies. Abraham Lincoln made a very famous speech as a Whig congressman in 1848 talking about the lies of President Polk. We made a little progress in the 1890s, but we were abandoned during the populist movement. Tom Watson, who started out as a Georgia activist, arguing for multiracial alliances among poor farmers, ended up as a congressman supporting the Ku Klux Klan. This is the story, this is the narrative of our experience in America. Slavery did not end in 1865. Look at the introduction to my video. You'll see an Attorney General's Circular 3591 talking about slavery and ordering slavery to be prosecuted in December of 1941. Legal slavery existed under peonage throughout the South in the United States up until 1942, when the last prosecution for peonage as slavery. He called peonage slavery. The Attorney General. Read it. You've been lied to. There's a wonderful book, Slavery by Another Name, and there's a PBS documentary talking about it in detail. Unfortunately, America, like other nations, Japan in particular, lies about its history. It doesn't teach its history in schools. We teach mythology. And too many people, from liberal to conservative, from the Harvards and Yales and Browns and Columbias to the community colleges, don't know American history other than the mythological narrative that is told. George Washington was the richest colonist at the time of the Revolution. It was a revolution of elites. He was a major slaveholder. Thomas Jefferson was a colonial governor of Virginia. These people were not ordinary working people. So when we see a Donald Trump, a gangster millionaire, and I literally mean a gangster millionaire. Remember, his grandfather ran a brothel in Toronto after he immigrated from Germany. His father was a slumlord in New York City. The great folk singer Woody Guthrie wrote a song about it. Search it on YouTube. Old Man Trump on YouTube. You'll see the song. You can hear it sung. It was composed by Woody Guthrie. It's there. Donald Trump was prosecuted by the Justice Department, by Nixon's Justice Department. John Mitchell of Watergate fame, his Justice Department, in 1973 for racial discrimination. That's where I first read about Trump, in the New York Times when I was in college. In Atlantic City, he discriminated against black folks, didn't want black workers on the floor when his special visitors came. Trump's racism, his misogyny, is part of a long American tradition. America first. Make America great again. This goes back to the 1930s to Charles Lindbergh and the American First Movement, which was a pro-Nazi movement. We have been here before. I call this cyclical process, and I've called it since 1987 in a paper I wrote when I was in law school, a Sisyphean cycle. Sisyphus was a Greek myth of a man, of a ruler. He was actually a bad ruler who was condemned to hell. And his hell was he was condemned to roll a rock up a hill to only have it roll down again. And he joyfully did that. Albert Camus wrote a book taking that mythology and using it in a very, very positive way, that we can take joy in our struggles. And that's really what I'm saying about optimism. We don't have to have optimism about, yes, justice will win out, But we can take joy in the struggle against oppression, against wrong, against evil. And that's what I have to say. Have a good day. As the Mozambicans said during their struggle against the Portuguese, a luta continua. It's a film I used to show when I was in college. The struggle continues. And as I love to say, since I'm a Star Trek fan, particularly the Next Generation, resistance is not futile. Have a good day.